Welcome to I'm. Tonight we embark on a chilling journey into the heart of 1920s London, where shadows conceal secrets and a brilliant mind unravels them. Settle in, my dear listeners, for a tale of mystery and deduction featuring the inimitable Hercule Poirot. And please tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Chapter 1. The stage is set. The year was 1927, and London was a city of contrasts. By day, the clatter of horse-drawn carriages mingled with the impatient horns of motor cars, while by night, the glow of gaslights and electric lamps painted the streets in a chiaroscuro of ambition and secrecy. At the heart of the West End stood the Ashbourne Theatre, a monument to art and opulence, its facade adorned with gilded cornices and statues of muses frozen in mid-performance. Within its walls, the city's elite gathered to lose themselves in the magic of the stage. But tonight, the theater was poised to host a drama far darker than any play. The Ashbourne was abuzz with anticipation for the premiere of The Midnight Veil, a new work by Victor Marlowe, known to all as the Shadow Playwright. Marlowe was a figure of enigma, a man who shunned the spotlight yet commanded it through his words. His plays, laced with poetic melancholy and biting social commentary, had made him the darling of London's literati, but also a target for those who saw their own secrets reflected in his scripts. The Midnight Veil was rumored to be his most daring yet, a tale of betrayal and hidden truths that promised to expose the underbelly of high society. Whispers circulated that Marlowe had drawn inspiration from real scandals, a dangerous choice in a city where reputations were currency. Tonight, however, was not the premiere but a private rehearsal, a select gathering invited by Marlowe himself. The guest list was as eclectic as it was exclusive, and among those seated in the crimson velvet stalls was Hercule Poirot, the Belgian detective whose reputation for solving the unsolvable preceded him. Poirot, with his immaculate suit, polished cane, and perfectly symmetrical mustache, seemed an incongruous figure amidst the theatrical crowd. Yet his presence was no accident. Marlowe had personally requested Poirot's attendance, a cryptic note delivered to his flat hinting at a matter requiring your unique talents. Poirot, ever intrigued by a puzzle, had accepted, accompanied by his loyal friend Captain Arthur Hastings. As they settled into their seats, Hastings glanced around, his boyish curiosity undimmed by years of accompanying Poirot. "I say, Poirot, this is quite the affair. Marlowe's got half of London talking about this play. Do you think he's up to something more than a rehearsal?" Poirot's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the auditorium. "Mon ami, Victor Marlowe is a man who crafts illusions for a living. If he has summoned Hercule Poirot, it is because the illusion hides a truth or a danger. We shall see." The theater was a study in grandeur. Overhead, a massive chandelier glittered like a constellation, its crystals catching the light and scattering it across the frescoed ceiling. The stage, framed by heavy velvet curtains, was set for The Midnight Veil, a drawing-room scene with a grand piano, a chaise longue, and a portrait draped in black cloth, a prop that, according to whispers, held a secret central to the play. The air was thick with the scent of polished wood, fresh paint, and anticipation. The invited guests were few but significant, each a player in the drama unfolding off stage. Poirot's gaze settled on them one by one, his mind cataloging details with the precision of a watchmaker. First was Lillian Cresswell, the leading lady of the Midnight Veil. Her golden hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her emerald gown shimmered as she moved. Lillian was the toast of London's theatre scene, her beauty matched only by her ambition. Yet her laughter, as she chatted with the stagehand, seemed forced, her eyes darting nervously toward the balcony where Marlowe's office overlooked the stage. Poirot noted the tension in her posture, a woman desperate for the playwright's approval, perhaps fearing its loss. Beside her stood Reginald Thorne, the director, a portly man with a florid complexion and a penchant for bombast. His tailored suit strained at the seams as he barked orders at the crew, his voice echoing through the auditorium. Thorne's career had been flagging until Marlowe's scripts revived it, and the Midnight Veil was his chance to cement his comeback. But Poirot observed the sweat on Thorne's brow, the way his hands trembled as he adjusted his cravat. A man under pressure, perhaps more than the premiere warranted. Across the aisle sat Clara Marlowe, Victor's estranged sister. Her dark hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her black silk dress lent her an air of mourning. Clara's face was a mask of cold elegance, but her eyes burned with something unspoken. Rumors swirled that she and Victor had quarreled over their family estate, a sprawling manor in Kent that Victor had inherited, and promptly sold to fund his theatrical ventures. Clara's presence tonight was unexpected, and Poirot wondered what had drawn her to this rehearsal. Nearby, Edward Hale, the theater's financier, lounged with the confidence of a man accustomed to power. His pinstriped suit and gold pocket watch spoke of wealth, but his shifty gaze suggested secrets. Hale had bankrolled the Midnight Veil, but gossip hinted at his shady dealings, investments that bordered on extortion. Had Marlowe's script threatened to expose him? Poirot's mustache twitched at the thought. In the shadows of the stall stood Margaret Maggie Poole, Marlowe's assistant. Plainly dressed with mousy brown hair and spectacles, Maggie was easily overlooked, yet her devotion to Marlowe was evident in her quiet efficiency. She clutched a stack of scripts, her fingers ink-stained, her eyes darting protectively toward the office where Marlowe was expected to appear. Poirot noted her loyalty and the faint tremor in her hands. Finally, there was Dr. Simon Balfour, a psychiatrist and Marlowe's confidant. Balfour's calm demeanor and piercing blue eyes suggested a man who saw through facades. He had treated Marlowe for nervous episodes, according to discreet sources, and his presence tonight hinted at a deeper connection. Was he here as a friend, or to guard Marlowe's secrets? As the clock struck 8, the auditorium hushed. The rehearsal was to begin, but Marlowe had yet to appear. The cast took their places on stage, their lines faltering without the playwright's guiding hand. Lillian's voice cracked as she delivered a monologue, and Thorne's temper flared at a missed cue. The guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing the discord. Poirot leaned toward Hastings. "Mon ami, the absence of Monsieur Marlowe is no mere delay. The air it is charged with unease. Observe the faces. Each hides a secret, each fears a revelation." Hastings frowned. "You think something's wrong, Poirot? Surely he's just late. Writers are eccentric, aren't they?" "Eccentric, yes," Poirot replied, his voice low. "But Victor Marlowe is a man of precision. His absence is a note out of tune in this symphony." Minutes ticked by, the tension mounting. The stage manager, a wiry man named Jenkins, scurried to the balcony to check Marlowe's office. Moments later, a cry shattered the silence. Maggie Poole stumbled down the staircase, her face ashen, her spectacles askew. "He's dead," she gasped, clutching the railing. "Mr. Marlowe, he's been murdered." The auditorium erupted in gasps and murmurs. Lillian clutched Thorne's arm, Clara's composure faltered, and Hale's face drained of color. Balfour stood, his expression unreadable, while Maggie collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Poirot rose, his cane tapping the floor with deliberate calm. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "remain where you are. The curtain has risen on a tragedy, and Hercule Poirot shall uncover its author." Chapter 2. The crime discovered. The cry from Maggie Poole hung in the air like a dissonant chord, freezing the auditorium in a tableau of shock. The crimson curtains seemed to loom larger, as if the stage itself were holding its breath. Hercule Poirot, ever the picture of composure, adjusted his tie with a precise flick of his fingers and began his ascent up the narrow staircase to Marlowe's private office. Captain Hastings followed close behind, his face a mask of concern, while Inspector James Japp, who had been hastily summoned from a nearby pub by a frantic telephone call from the theater manager, arrived just in time to join them. Japp, with his rumpled trench coat and world-weary expression, puffed up the stairs, muttering under his breath about another dashed, inconvenient murder. The office door stood ajar, but inside the scene was one of stark finality. Victor Marlowe lay slumped over his desk, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, a dark stain blooming across his white shirt from a single gunshot wound to the chest. The room was small and cluttered, a sanctum of creativity turned crime scene, stacks of manuscripts piled high, ink pots overturned, and walls lined with playbills from past triumphs. The air smelled of gunpowder and aged paper, a pungent reminder of the violence that had shattered the evening's peace. Most telling of all was the door itself, solid oak, bolted from the inside with a heavy iron latch, the key still dangling in the lock. The single window, high on the wall overlooking the alley behind the theater, was firmly shut, its frame warped and rusted from years of London's damp climate. No one could have entered or exited without leaving traces, yet here was the body, isolated in what appeared to be an impenetrable fortress. Poirot knelt beside the corpse with the reverence of a scholar examining a rare manuscript. His gloved hands hovered, not touching but observing. "Ah, mon Dieu," he murmured, his Belgian accent thickening with intensity. "The wound. It is clean, precise from close range. The bullet entered here." He indicated the spot with a delicate gesture. "And there is no exit wound visible. The gun." His eyes flicked to the revolver lying on the desk, inches from Marlowe's limp hand. It was a Webley .38, the playwright's own, as confirmed later by the theater's record. The barrel was still warm to the touch. Poirot tested it gingerly, and there were no signs of struggle. A half-finished script of The Midnight Veil lay open before him, the last page scrawled with frantic notes in Marlowe's distinctive looping handwriting. Beside it sat a glass of brandy, untouched, the amber liquid swirling slightly as if disturbed by a recent breath of air. "Curious, this brandy," Poirot noted aloud. "Untouched, yet the glass is fresh poured. And the position of the body, slumped forward as if in contemplation, not surprise." Hastings, peering over Poirot's shoulder, swallowed hard. "Suicide, then? It looks that way, doesn't it? Locked room, his own gun?" Japp snorted, pulling out his notebook. "Suicide in a locked room? Possible, but I've seen enough faked ones to smell a rat. No note, for starters. And why invite a detective like you if he planned to off himself? Marlowe was a clever bloke, too clever to make it that easy." The inspector circled the room, his boots thudding softly on the Persian rug. He peered out the window, noting the sheer drop to the alley below, inaccessible without a ladder or superhuman leap. Windows bolted tight, no fire escape. Door locked from inside. If it's murder, it's a blooming miracle. Poirot straightened, his eyes gleaming with that familiar spark of challenge. "The impossible crime, Inspector. It is the delight of Hercule Poirot. But let us not rush to judgments. Suicide? Perhaps. Murder? May we. Equally possible. We must examine the motives, the opportunities, the little details that whisper the truth." He turned to Maggie Poole, who had followed them up, her face streaked with tears, her hands wringing a handkerchief. "Mademoiselle Poole, you discovered the body. Tell us, if you please, exactly what transpired." Maggie nodded shakily, pushing her spectacles up her nose. I was waiting for Mr. Marlowe to come down for the rehearsal. He'd asked me to bring him some notes from the script." When he didn't respond to my knock, I used my key. He trusted me with one, and there he was. Just like this. Oh, it's horrible. He was alive only an hour ago, discussing the final act with me. An hour ago, Poirot echoed, consulting his pocket watch. And the time now is precisely 8:17 p.m. Excellent. We shall need timelines from all. He ushered the group downstairs to the green room, a cozy space backstage adorned with faded posters and overstuffed armchairs. The suspects, and they were suspects now in Poirot's mind, were gathered there, the air thick with unease. Lillian Cresswell sat on a chaise, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her makeup slightly smudged for dramatic effect. Reginald Thorne paced like a caged lion, his face flushed. Clara Marlowe stood apart, arms crossed, her expression a fortress of disdain. Edward Hale lounged in a corner, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. Dr. Simon Balfour observed quietly from a wing-back chair, his psychiatrist's calm unbroken. Poirot entered with authority, Hastings and Japp flanking him. Mesdames et messieurs, a tragedy has befallen us. Victor Marlowe is dead, and until we know more, no one leaves this theater. Inspector Japp will take statements, but first I ask for your cooperation. Begin with Mademoiselle Cresswell. Lillian rose, her voice quivering with theatrical sorrow. Oh, Mr. Poirot, it's dreadful. Victor was my muse, my everything. He promised me the role of a lifetime in the Midnight Vale, a woman betrayed, rising from the ashes. Without him, what will become of me? I was in the dressing room preparing my lines when I heard the scream. I swear I loved him. Her eyes welled with tears, but Poirot noted the way her gaze flicked to the others, as if gauging reactions. Desperation clung to her like perfume. Rumors had it that Marlowe had considered recasting her for a more authentic actress, a blow to her fragile ego. Thorne interrupted, his voice booming. This is a catastrophe. The premiere is tomorrow. Rehearsals ruined. Critics will savage us. Marlowe was a genius, but a tyrant, always meddling in my direction, rewriting scenes at the last minute. But murder? I was on stage the whole time, overseeing the set. Delays like this could bankrupt me, his bluster masked fear. Poirot recalled whispers of Thorne's mounting debts tied to the play's success. Clara stepped forward, her voice icy. My brother and I hadn't spoken in years, but I came tonight to reconcile, or so I told myself. He owed me, you see, our family estate in Kent. He sold it out from under me to fund his art. We argued last month bitterly, inheritance rights. But I didn't kill him. I was taking a walk in the fog outside when it happened. No one saw me, but it's true. Her composure cracked slightly, revealing a grudge deep as the Thames. Poirot's mind ticked, verifiable alibi. Unlikely in the mist-shrouded night. Hale exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes darting. I was in the auditorium negotiating with potential investors via telephone. Marlowe's play was my golden goose, backed it with my own fortune. If it exposes my business dealings, well, that's unfortunate, but I didn't pull the trigger. Check the call logs. I was there all evening. His sweat-beaded forehead suggested otherwise. Hale's dealings were rumored to involve blackmail, and Marlowe's script might have veiled references to them. Maggie, still trembling, spoke next. I was the last to see him alive, as I said. He was fine, excited even, working on the script. I left to fetch more paper and heard the shot moments later, but I thought it was a prop. When he didn't come down, I went back. Her loyalty was palpable, but Poirot wondered at the convenience of her key and her proximity. Finally, Dr. Balfour leaned forward, his tone measured. As Victor's physician and friend, I can say he was under strain. Paranoia, perhaps, from the pressures of fame. We spoke earlier. He confided fears of betrayal. Suicide wouldn't surprise me. I was in the lobby reviewing some notes when the commotion started. His analytical gaze met Poirot's without flinching, but the detective sensed layers beneath the calm, a man who knew secrets that could kill. Poirot clasped his hands, pacing slowly. Motive, opportunity, means, these are the pillars of crime. Each of you has a thread connecting you to Monsieur Marlowe. Love, ambition, resentment, greed, loyalty, knowledge. The locked room? It screams impossibility, yet I assure you it is solvable. The brandy untouched, the gun warm, the script unfinished, these are clues, not riddles. We shall unravel them one by one. As Japp began formal interviews, Poirot slipped back to the office, his mind a whirlwind. The fog outside pressed against the window like a conspirator. The killer, he whispered to himself, is among us, and the performance has only just begun. Chapter 3. Investigation begins. The green room of the Ashbourne Theatre was a cocoon of tension, its faded velvet armchairs and flickering gaslights doing little to ease the chill that had settled over the gathered suspects. The air was heavy with the scent of old perfume and cigarette smoke mingling with the faint tang of fear. Hercule Poirot stood at the center, his small, precise figure commanding the space as if he were the director of this grim drama. His polished shoes gleamed and his mustache was a perfect crescent, betraying none of the complexity whirring behind his sharp green eyes. Captain Hastings hovered nearby, scribbling notes, while Inspector Japp, ever the pragmatist, leaned against a wall, his notebook open but his patience visibly thinning. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice soft yet resonant. The death of Victor Marlowe is no accident, nor, I suspect, a simple suicide. The locked room, the single gunshot, the untouched brandy, these are the threads of a tapestry woven with intent. We shall now unravel it with order and method. Each of you will speak, and Hercule Poirot will listen. The truth, it hides, but not for long. He turned first to Lillian Cresswell, who sat perched on the edge of a chaise longue, her emerald gown catching the light like a siren's lure. Her face was a study in theatrical distress, but Poirot noted the calculated tilt of her head, the way her fingers clutched her handkerchief just so. Mademoiselle Cresswell, he said, you claim a great love for Monsieur Marlowe, yet I hear whispers he considered recasting your role in The Midnight Veil. Speak, if you please, of your last moments with him. Lillian's eyes widened, then narrowed, a flash of defiance breaking through her grief. Victor was my mentor, my inspiration, she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. Yes, he mentioned recasting, cruelly I thought, to push me to perform better. But I'd never harm him. I was in my dressing room memorizing lines when Maggie screamed, "Ask the stagehands, they saw me there." Her plea was fervent, but Poirot's gaze lingered on her hands, which twisted the handkerchief into knots. A woman desperate for stardom, he thought, might see betrayal as a mortal wound. Next, Poirot turned to Reginald Thorne, who had ceased pacing to glare at the detective. The director's florid face was flushed with indignation, his cravat askew from constant tugging. "Monsieur Thorne," Poirot said, "your career rides on the success of this play, no? Yet Marlowe's interference, his rewrites, his demands, threatened your vision. Tell me, where were you when the shot was fired?" Thorne's jowls quivered. "Interference? Ha! Marlowe was a genius, but a meddling one. I was on stage directing the lighting crew. The whole cast can vouch for me. This murder's a disaster. Without Marlowe, the play's sunk, and so am I. Why would I kill the goose that lays the golden eggs?" His bluster was loud, but Poirot noted the sweat beading on his brow, the way his eyes darted to the door. Financial ruin, he knew, could drive a man to desperate acts. Clara Marlowe stood apart, her black silk dress absorbing the light like a void. Her face was a mask of cold composure, but her eyes burned with something raw. "Madame Marlowe," Poirot said, Your estrangement from your brother is no secret, an inheritance lost, a family divided. You say you walked in the fog, an alibi with no witnesses. Speak plainly. What passed between you and Victor? Clara's lips tightened, but her voice was steady. Victor was a thief of more than just money. He took our family's legacy, our estate in Kent, and squandered it on this theater of vanities. I came tonight to demand my share, yes, but I didn't kill him. I was outside, alone, clearing my head. The fog was thick. No one saw me, but that's the truth. Her defiance was unshakable, yet Poirot sensed a crack in her armor. A flicker of guilt, perhaps, or grief. An unverified alibi, he noted, was as good as none. Edward Hale, the financier, lounged against a prop table, his cigarette sending curls of smoke into the air. His pinstriped suit was impeccable, but his eyes were restless, scanning the room like a cornered animal. "Monsieur Hale," Poirot said, "your fortune funds the Midnight Veil, yet rumors suggest Marlowe's play might expose your less savory dealings. Where were you and what was your business with him?" Hale exhaled sharply, his smile thin. "Expose me? Nonsense. Marlowe's play was fiction, nothing more. I was in the auditorium, on the telephone with investors, checked the exchange records. My call was logged at 7:45. I had no reason to kill him. His success was my profit." His voice was smooth, but Poirot observed the tremor in his hand, the way he crushed his cigarette too quickly. A man with secrets, he thought, might fear a playwright's pen. Margaret Maggie Poole sat hunched in a corner, her mousy appearance at odds with the intensity in her eyes. Her spectacles glinted as she looked up, clutching a worn notebook. "Mademoiselle Poole," Poirot said gently, "you were closest to Marlowe, his trusted assistant. You saw him last an hour before his death. Tell me, what was his state of mind?" Maggie's voice was soft, almost a whisper. "He was agitated but excited. He was revising the Midnight Veil, adding lines about betrayal. I brought him coffee, then went to the props room to organize scripts. I heard a bang, thought it was a stage effect until I returned and found him." She broke off, tears spilling. Poirot noted her loyalty, but also the notebook, its pages filled with Marlowe's handwriting, and hers. A devoted assistant or one who knew too much? Finally, Dr. Simon Balfour met Poirot's gaze with unnerving calm. The psychiatrist's tailored suit and steady hands suggested a man in control, but his blue eyes held depths Poirot could not yet fathom. "Doctor," Poirot said, "you knew Marlowe's mind as few did. Paranoia, you said. Did he fear someone in this room?" Balfour leaned forward, his voice measured. "Victor was troubled, haunted by fears that his work exposed him to enemies. He confided in me about threats, vague but persistent. I advised rest, but he was consumed by the play. I was in the lobby reviewing patient notes when the scream came. Suicide, I fear, is plausible." His composure was flawless, but Poirot wondered at its perfection. A psychiatrist, he knew, could mask truths as deftly as any actor. With the initial statements gathered, Poirot returned to Marlowe's office, Hastings trailing like a faithful hound. The room was as they left it, the revolver, the brandy, the script. But Poirot's eyes caught new details. A faint scratch marred the window frame, barely visible in the dim light. "Regardez, Hastings," he said, pointing. "This scratch, it is fresh, yet the window is rusted shut. Curious, non?" On the desk, a crimson thread lay caught in a drawer's edge, its vibrant hue out of place in the muted room. And this thread, silk perhaps from a scarf or gown, it speaks of presence, of haste. Hastings frowned. "But the door was locked, Poirot, and the window, impossible to open without breaking it. How could anyone get in?" Poirot smiled, a glimmer of mischief in his eyes. The impossible, mon ami, is merely a challenge to the gray cells. The scratch, the thread, the brandy, these are not accidents. They are clues, and they whisper of a mind as clever as Marlowe's own. Jap, rejoining them, shook his head. I've got men checking alibis, but it's a mess. No one saw Clara outside. Hale's call logs are being verified, and the stagehands are vague about Lillian and Thorne. Maggie's the only one with a key, but she was in the props room, or so she says. Balfour's story holds, but it's too neat for my liking. Poirot nodded, his fingers steepled. We must look beyond the alibis, Inspector. The motives, they are the heart of this puzzle. Love, ambition, greed, revenge, loyalty, fear. Each suspect wears a mask. But the stage, it reveals all. We shall return to it and to the little details that betray the truth. As they descended to the auditorium, the fog pressed thicker against the theater's windows, a silent conspirator in the night's secrets. Poirot paused, his cane tapping softly. The killer, he murmured, is close. And Hercule Poirot is closer still. Chapter 4. Clues and Red Herrings. The Ashbourne Theatre, bathed in the eerie glow of gaslights, seemed to pulse with secrets as Hercule Poirot moved through its backstage corridors. The air was thick with the scent of grease paint and sawdust, the detritus of a world where illusion reigned. Victor Marlowe's death had transformed the theater into a stage for a different kind of drama, one where the script was unwritten and the players hid their true roles. Poirot, with his meticulous demeanor and unyielding curiosity, was determined to rewrite the narrative piece by piece. Captain Hastings trailed behind, his notepad filled with hasty scribbles while Inspector Japp coordinated, his constables, their heavy footsteps echoing in the cavernous wings. Poirot's investigation had reached a critical juncture. The locked room, the gunshot, the untouched brandy. These were the bones of the puzzle, but now he sought the flesh. The subtle clues and deceptive trails that would lead to the killer. Mon ami, he said to Hastings, pausing by a cluttered prop table. The truth is like a fine tapestry. The threads are there, but some are false, woven to distract. We must find the true pattern. Their first discovery came in the backstage labyrinth, where a narrow door, half hidden behind a rack of costumes, caught Poirot's eye. It was painted to blend with the wall, its hinges oiled but dusty. With a gentle push, it creaked open to reveal a cramped passage, its walls lined with cobwebs and its floor thick with grime. The passage wound upward, emerging behind a bookcase in Marlowe's office, a secret route, unnoticed by the casual observer. Voila, Poirot murmured, his gloved finger tracing the undisturbed dust. A hidden way, but unused for years, it seems. Or is it? He bent closer, noting a faint scuff mark on the floor as if something had been dragged recently. This passage, it could bypass the locked door, but the dust... It lies, perhaps, to conceal a truth. Hastings peered into the gloom, his face skeptical. If someone used this, wouldn't there be footprints? It looks untouched, Poirot. Patience, Hastings, Poirot replied, his mustache twitching. The killer is clever, and cleverness leaves traces, subtle but present. He pocketed a small sample of the dust, his mind already turning to the possibility of staged neglect. Back in Marlowe's office, Poirot returned to the desk where the crimson thread he had noted earlier still lay, caught in the drawer's edge. He held it to the light, its silk shimmering like a drop of blood. This thread, he said, it is from a garment of quality. Perhaps a scarf, perhaps a gown. It speaks of someone who was here in haste or carelessness. He recalled Clara Marlowe's crimson scarf, draped elegantly over her black dress, but also Lillian's penchant for dramatic costumes. A clue or a deliberate misdirection? His attention shifted to a crumpled note tucked beneath the script of The Midnight Veil. In Marlowe's looping handwriting, it read, The truth lies in the shadows. Beware the veil. The words were cryptic, almost poetic, mirroring the play's themes of betrayal and hidden motives. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Was this a warning from Marlowe, a clue to his killer, or a line meant for his play, repurposed by a cunning mind? Downstairs, Japp had gathered new information from the stagehands. 1. A wiry lad named Tommy claimed to have seen Lillian in the wings just before the scream, adjusting her costume. Yet her dressing room was on the opposite side of the theater. Another reported hearing a muffled argument from Marlowe's office around 7:30 p.m., though the voices were indistinct. Japp, exasperated, joined Poirot in the office. This place is a circus, Poirot. Everyone's got a story and none of them match up. I'm starting to think this locked room nonsense is just theatrics. Poirot smiled faintly. Theatrics, Inspector, are precisely the point. This is a theater and our killer is a performer. Let us consider the props. He moved to the window, examining the faint scratch he had noticed earlier. It ran vertically along the frame as if a tool had been used to pry it open, or to make it appear so. Yet the rust and grime suggested the window hadn't been opened in years. A red herring, perhaps, Poirot mused, to distract from the true method. The investigation took a new turn when Hastings, rummaging through a props room, found a curious item. Edward Hale's gold pocket watch, its chain tangled in a coil of rope beneath a seat in the auditorium. I say, Poirot, look at this. Hale said he was on the telephone, but this was found nowhere near the call box. Could he have been up here, near the office? Poirot examined the watch, its face etched with Hale's initials. A careless loss, or a planted clue? Monsieur Hale's alibi rests on his call logs, but this suggests he wandered. We shall ask him. Hale, when confronted, flushed red, insisting he'd misplaced the watch days ago during a rehearsal. Anyone could have moved it, he snapped, but his eyes betrayed unease. Poirot noted the lie but said nothing, filing it away like a card in his mental index. Another clue surfaced in Maggie Poole's notebook, which Poirot had requested to review. Amid her meticulous notes on script revisions was a page of prop lists, one entry circled in red ink. Pistol, Act 2, Scene 3. The handwriting matched Maggie's, but the ink was fresher, as if added hastily. When questioned, Maggie stammered, I wrote that earlier for the play. It's just a prop list. Yet Poirot's keen eye caught a discrepancy. The prop pistol was a stage replica, incapable of firing, unlike the real Webley found with Marlowe. Had Maggie forged the entry to cover her tracks? Or was she documenting a prop that never existed? Dr. Simon Balfour's calm demeanor drew Poirot's scrutiny next. The psychiatrist had provided a detailed account of his movements, reviewing notes in the lobby. But a stagehand mentioned seeing a man matching Balfour's description near the balcony staircase just before the scream. When Poirot pressed him, Balfour's composure held, but his fingers tightened on his pen. I may have stepped out briefly to check on Victor, he admitted. He was anxious and I worried for his health. But I returned to the lobby immediately. His story was plausible, yet Poirot sensed a guardedness, as if Balfour were editing his own script. Clara Marlowe's crimson scarf became a focal point when a stagehand recalled seeing it draped over a chair in the props room, not on Clara herself. I never removed it, Clara insisted, her voice sharp. Someone must have taken it to frame me. The scarf's presence in the props room, far from her claimed walk in the fog, cast doubt on her alibi. But Poirot wondered if it was too convenient. A classic misdirection, like a prop left to mislead. As the night wore on, Poirot gathered the suspects in the auditorium, their faces illuminated by the stage lights. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, his voice deliberate and soothing, The clues multiply, but so do the shadows. A hidden passage, a crimson thread, a cryptic note, a misplaced watch, a forged list. Each tells a story, but which is true? The killer has laid traps, but Hercule Poirot sees through the fog. Hastings leaned in, whispering, "You're enjoying this, aren't you? All these red herrings, it's like a game to you." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "A game, mon ami, but one with deadly stakes. The red herrings are the killer's performance, but the truth, it waits in the wings." Jap, rubbing his temples, muttered, "I've got men sweeping the passage and checking the watch for prints. But this note, beware the veil. It's too poetic for my taste. Could it be a suicide note after all?" Poirot shook his head. "Non, Inspector. Marlowe was a man of drama, but not despair. This note is a clue or a taunt. We must look to the play itself, the midnight veil. Its secrets may mirror the killer's." As the suspects dispersed, Poirot lingered on stage, his gaze fixed on the draped portrait from the play's set. He lifted the cloth, revealing a blank canvas, a prop meant to symbolize hidden truths. "The veil," he murmured, "hides more than we know. But the truth, it will be revealed." Chapter 5. Complications and Twists. The Ashbourne Theatre was a labyrinth of secrets, its backstage passages and dimly lit corners whispering of deception. Hercule Poirot stood on the stage, the heavy velvet curtains framing him like a tableau vivant. His sharp green eyes scanning the auditorium where the suspects sat, their faces taut with unease. The discovery of the hidden passage, the crimson thread, the cryptic note, and the misplaced pocket watch had deepened the mystery of Victor Marlowe's murder. But Poirot sensed the killer was not yet done. The locked room, the gunshot, the untouched brandy, these were but the opening act, and the drama was about to escalate. Captain Hastings, ever eager, hovered nearby, his notebook nearly full. "I say, Poirot, we're getting somewhere, aren't we? That passage, the thread. It's all pointing somewhere, though I'm dashed if I know where." Inspector Japp, pacing near the orchestra pit, grumbled, "This case is a tangle. Every clue seems to point at everyone and no one. We need something solid, Poirot." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Patience, mes amis. The killer weaves a clever web, but every web has a flaw. We must watch for the moment they overreach." His words were calm, deliberate, but his mind was a whirlwind, sifting through the clues and red herrings that littered the case like props on a stage. As the investigation resumed, a sudden crash shattered the silence, reverberating from the catwalk above the stage. The suspects gasped, and Poirot's head snapped up, his cane tapping urgently as he moved toward the sound. A stagehand shouted, pointing to the stage below, where Lillian Cresswell lay crumpled beside a fallen prop dagger, its blade glinting in the spotlight. Her emerald gown was disheveled, her golden hair spilling free, and a faint bruise bloomed on her temple. The cast and crew surged forward, but Poirot raised a hand, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Arrêtez! Do not touch her! This is no accident!" Hastings knelt beside Lillian, checking her pulse. "She's alive, Poirot, but out cold. Looks like she fell or was pushed." Japp, already barking orders to his constables, examined the catwalk above, where a loosened railing dangled precariously. "Sabotage, maybe," he muttered. "Or someone gave her a shove. This is getting out of hand." Lillian stirred, her eyes fluttering open as she clutched Hastings' arm. "Someone pushed me," she whispered, her voice trembling but laced with theatrical flair. "I was checking the lighting cues up there. I felt hands then. Darkness." Her words sent a ripple through the group, and Poirot's gaze swept over the suspects, each reacting in their own way. Reginald Thorne blustered, "This is madness. The theater's cursed." Clara Marlowe's icy composure faltered, her hands tightening. Edward Hale lit another cigarette, his fingers shaking. Margaret Maggie Poole gasped, her spectacles fogging with tears. And Dr. Simon Balfour stepped forward, offering to examine Lillian, his calm demeanor unshaken. Poirot waved Balfour back. "Non, doctor. Mademoiselle Cresswell will be seen by a police surgeon. For now, we question." He helped Lillian to a chair, his eyes never leaving her face. "You say you were pushed, mademoiselle. Did you see your attacker? A glimpse, perhaps? A scent, a sound?" Lillian shook her head, wincing. "It was too dark. But I heard a rustle like silk and a quick breath. Whoever it was, they knew the catwalk." Her accusation hung in the air, implicating someone familiar with the theater's layout. Someone like Thorne, Maggie, or even Clara, whose crimson scarf had already drawn suspicion. The attack on Lillian was a jolt, suggesting the killer was still among them, desperate to silence a witness or muddy the waters. Poirot returned to the catwalk, his cane tapping as he examined the loosened railing. A faint smudge of grease paint marked the edge, its vibrant hue matching the kind used by the actors. "Regardez, Hastings," he said, pointing. "This grease paint, it is fresh, applied recently. Mademoiselle Cresswell wears such makeup, but so do others. A clue or another deception." Jap, climbing down from the catwalk, held up a small screwdriver, its tip worn. "Found this up there. Could have been used to tamper with the railing. Anyone here handy with tools?" His eyes flicked to Thorne, whose role as director included overseeing stage mechanics. Thorne bristled. "I was with the crew below, Jap. Ask them. I don't go scrambling about like a stagehand." Poirot's investigation deepened as he re-examined the suspect's alibis in light of the new attack. He began with Thorne, whose temper flared when pressed about the catwalk. "I know the theater's ins and outs," he admitted, "but I was directing the scene below when Lillian fell. The crew saw me." Yet a stagehand's hesitant report placed Thorne near the catwalk stairs earlier, adjusting a spotlight. Poirot noted the discrepancy, his mind cataloging Thorne's financial desperation and volatile temper. Clara Marlowe's alibi remained shaky. Her crimson scarf found in the props room was now joined by a new clue. A second crimson thread, this one caught in the catwalk's railing. "I told you I never removed my scarf," Clara snapped, her voice sharp as glass. "Someone's framing me, probably that mousy assistant." Her accusation pointed to Maggie, but Poirot wondered if Clara's outrage masked her own guilt. Her solitary walk in the fog offered no witnesses, and her resentment of Victor's success burned brightly. Edward Hale's story wavered further when Jap's constables reported that his telephone call, logged at 7:45 p.m., lasted only 2 minutes. Hardly the lengthy investor meeting he claimed. Confronted, Hale's composure cracked. "All right, I met Marlowe briefly in his office," he admitted, "to discuss funding. He was alive when I left at 7:50. I didn't mention it to avoid suspicion." His confession placed him near the crime scene, and Poirot noted the sweat on his brow, the flicker of fear in his eyes. Was Hale's financial stake in the play a motive for murder, or was he merely a pawn in a larger scheme? Maggie Poole, trembling under Poirot's scrutiny, confessed to a new detail. I overheard a fight between Victor and Dr. Balfour," she said, her voice barely audible. "It was about an hour before it happened. Victor was shouting about betrayal, about someone stealing his work. I didn't say anything earlier because I didn't want to cause trouble." Her revelation cast suspicion on Balfour, but also on herself. Her presence near the office, her key, her knowledge of Marlowe's secrets. Poirot's eyes lingered on her notebook, where the forged prop list still nagged at him. Dr. Simon Balfour, ever composed, met Poirot's questions with clinical precision. "Yes, Victor and I argued," he admitted. "He was paranoid, convinced someone was sabotaging his play. I urged him to seek help, but he refused. I left him alive and returned to the lobby. Yet the stagehand's report of a man resembling Balfour near the balcony staircase lingered in Poirot's mind. Was Balfour's calm a mask for a deeper involvement? The grease paint smudge on the catwalk added a new layer. Lillian's makeup matched it, but so did the supplies used by the entire cast. Poirot tested a theory, asking Lillian to demonstrate her stage makeup routine. She applied the grease paint with practiced ease, but Poirot noted her hands were steady, her application precise, no smudges. Curious, he murmured. The smudge was careless, unlike Mademoiselle Cresswell's skill. Perhaps another hand applied it. As the night deepened, Poirot gathered the suspects in the green room, the air thick with suspicion. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice slow and deliberate. "This attack on Mademoiselle Cresswell is no coincidence. The killer grows bold, striking to silence or to confuse. The grease paint, the screwdriver, the crimson thread. These are the strokes of a desperate artist. But Hercule Poirot sees the canvas beneath." Hastings whispered. "This is getting dangerous, Poirot. If the killer's targeting Lillian, who's next?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The killer is close, mon ami, and their performance falters. The threads are tightening, and soon the veil will lift." Japp, frustrated, added, "We're sealing the theater. No one leaves until we've searched every inch. That passage, the watch, now this attack, it's all connected, but how?" Poirot paced, his cane tapping rhythmically. He paused by the stage where the draped portrait from the midnight veil stood, its blank canvas a silent taunt. "The play," he murmured. "It holds the key. Betrayal, shadows, a veil of secrets. The killer mirrors Marlowe's script, but they cannot outwit the method of Hercule Poirot." Chapter 6. The Revelation. The Ashbourne Theatre's auditorium was a cauldron of tension, its crimson seats and gilded chandeliers bathed in the ghostly glow of stage lights. The suspects, Lillian Cresswell, Reginald Thorne, Clara Marlowe, Edward Hale, Margaret Maggie Poole, and Dr. Simon Balfour, sat in a semicircle on the stage, their faces a gallery of fear, defiance, and guarded hope. Hercule Poirot stood center stage, his small, immaculate figure commanding the space as if he were the star of this grim performance. His cane rested lightly in his hand, his mustache a perfect crescent, but his green eyes burned with the intensity of a man who had unraveled a puzzle. Captain Hastings sat in the front row, his notebook forgotten, while Inspector Japp leaned against a prop table, his skepticism tempered by anticipation. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice slow and deliberate, carrying the warmth of a fireside tale yet edged with steel. The murder of Victor Marlowe was no mere act of passion, nor a suicide born of despair. It was a performance meticulously staged, designed to deceive. The locked room, the gunshot, the untouched brandy, these were the props of a killer who believed themselves cleverer than Hercule Poirot. But no one outwits the gray cells. The suspects shifted, their eyes darting. Lillian clutched her handkerchief. Thorne's jowls quivered, Clara's composure tightened. Hale's cigarette trembled, Maggie's spectacles glinted, and Balfour's calm seemed a fragile mask. Poirot paced, his cane tapping rhythmically as he began to weave the threads of the mystery into a coherent tapestry. "Let us begin with the scene," he said, gesturing toward the balcony where Marlowe's office overlooked the stage. A room locked from the inside, a single gunshot, a revolver warm in the victim's hand. Suicide, you might think, as did our good Inspector Japp at first. Japp grunted, but Poirot continued. "Yet the details betray a different story. The brandy, untouched, suggests no moment of reflection. The angle of the wound, straight and close, implies a steady hand, not Marlowe's, whose script lay unfinished, his pen still wet with ink. No, this was murder, and the locked room was the killer's masterpiece. He turned to the window, its rusted bolt a silent witness. The window, you see, was the first deception. A faint scratch suggested it had been opened, yet the rust and grime were undisturbed. I examined this closely and discovered a clever trick. A hidden mechanism, concealed in the frame, allowed the window to be opened and resealed from the outside, accessible via the catwalk above. The scratch was a deliberate mark, meant to mislead us into thinking the window was the entry point. But it was not. Hastings gasped. The catwalk? But how? Poirot raised a hand. Patience, mon ami. The catwalk led to the window, yes, but the true path was elsewhere. The hidden passage found behind the bookcase was the key. Its dust appeared undisturbed, but I found a scuff mark cleverly covered with sprinkled ash from a cigarette, likely Monsieur Hale's. Hale's eyes widened, but Poirot pressed on. The passage connected the office to the backstage, allowing the killer to enter, shoot Marlowe, and exit, locking the door with a duplicate key hidden in the passage's shadows. The suspects murmured, and Poirot's gaze swept over them. But who? Each of you had motive, opportunity, and means. Let us examine the threads. He turned to Lillian first. Mademoiselle Cresswell, your desperation for Marlowe's approval was clear. He threatened to recast your role, a blow to your ambition. Your grease paint matched the smudge on the catwalk, and your presence in the wings was noted. Yet your attack, pushed from the catwalk, suggests you were a target, not the culprit. Lillian's hand flew to her bruised temple. I told you someone tried to kill me. We shall return to that, Poirot said, moving to Thorne. Monsieur Thorne, your career hung by a thread. Marlowe's interference threatened your comeback, and your knowledge of the theater's mechanics made you suspect. The screwdriver found on the catwalk could be yours, yet your alibi, corroborated by the crew, holds, if weakly. Thorne blustered. I was directing, not skulking about. Poirot nodded, then faced Clara. Madame Marlowe, your resentment was palpable. The loss of your family estate fueled your hatred, and the crimson thread matching your scarf implicated you. Yet the scarf was found in the props room, not with you, suggesting a frame. Your walk in the fog, unverified, leaves you vulnerable. Clara's eyes flashed. I'm no murderer. Someone stole my scarf. Précisément, Poirot said, turning to Hale. Monsieur Hale, your fortune backed the play, but Marlowe's script hinted at your shady dealings. Your pocket watch, found under a seat, contradicted your telephone alibi, and your admission of meeting Marlowe placed you near the crime. Yet your fear suggests you are not the mastermind. Hale crushed his cigarette. I told you, I left him alive. Poirot's gaze shifted to Balfour. Doctor, your calm is a mask. Marlowe's paranoia, which you treated, pointed to betrayal. Your argument with him, overheard by Mademoiselle Poole, was heated. Your presence near the balcony staircase raises questions, yet your composure suggests control, not guilt. Balfour met his eyes. Victor was troubled, but I sought to help, not harm. Finally, Poirot turned to Maggie Poole, her mousy figure trembling under his scrutiny. Mademoiselle Poole, you were Marlowe's shadow, his devoted assistant. You had the key, the knowledge, the access. The forged prop list in your notebook, the grease paint smudge, your proximity to the office, all point to you. But why? Maggie's tears fell. I loved him. I'd never hurt him. Poirot raised a finger, his voice softening. Love, mademoiselle, can twist into betrayal. Let us consider the play, The Midnight Veil. Its theme of hidden truths was no accident. Marlowe confided to me in his letter that he feared his work was stolen. I examined the script closely and found notes in your handwriting, Mademoiselle Poole. Not mere annotations, but entire scenes uncredited. You co-wrote The Midnight Veil, did you not? The room gasped, and Maggie's face drained of color. Poirot continued, relentless. Marlowe refused to acknowledge your contribution, fearing scandal. Your ideas, he said, were too radical for his audience. Your loyalty turned to resentment, a wound festering in the shadows. You knew the theater's secrets, the passage, the window mechanism, the duplicate key. You entered the office, shot Marlowe with his own revolver, and staged the locked room, planting the crimson thread to implicate Clara. The grease paint smudge was your error, left when you re-entered to adjust the scene. Maggie sobbed, her spectacles fogging. He took everything from me. I gave him my words, my soul, and he called them his own. I didn't mean to. It was a moment of rage. Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. The attack on Mademoiselle Cresswell was your final act, to deflect suspicion. You pushed her, knowing her role as the betrayed heroine mirrored your own pain. But the grease paint betrayed you, as did the forged list. Japp stepped forward, his handcuffs glinting. Margaret Poole, you're under arrest for the murder of Victor Marlowe. Maggie collapsed, her confession spilling forth. Years of uncredited work, Marlowe's dismissal of her talent, the final straw when he mocked her contributions hours before his death. Poirot turned to the others, his expression somber. The human heart, it is a complex stage. Love, ambition, betrayal. These are the motives that drive us to darkness. But the truth, it always emerges. Hastings, awestruck, whispered, "You knew it was her all along, didn't you?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Not all along, mon ami. The gray cells, they work in silence, but they never rest. The veil has lifted and justice will take its bow." The stage lights dimmed, casting long shadows as Japp led Maggie away. The suspects dispersed, their secrets laid bare, and the Ashbourne Theatre seemed to exhale, its drama resolved, for now. Chapter 7. Justice served. The Ashbourne Theatre, once a beacon of London's West End, now stood cloaked in the somber hush of resolution. The stage lights, which had illuminated Victor Marlowe's final hours, cast long shadows across the auditorium, where the crimson seats seemed to mourn their fallen playwright. Hercule Poirot stood at the edge of the stage, his small, fastidious figure a pillar of calm amid the storm of emotions that had swept through the suspects. His cane rested lightly in his hand, his mustache impeccable, but his green eyes held a quiet melancholy, a recognition of the tragedy that lay beneath even the most calculated crime. Captain Hastings sat nearby, his face a mix of awe and relief, while Inspector Japp supervised the constables as they escorted Margaret Maggie Poole from the scene, her wrists bound by cold steel handcuffs. The revelation of Maggie's guilt had stunned the gathered company. Lillian Cresswell, her bruise still visible, clutched a shawl around her shoulders, her theatrical tears replaced by a haunted silence. Reginald Thorne slumped in a chair, his bluster extinguished, muttering about the play's uncertain future. Clara Marlowe stood apart, her icy composure restored, but her eyes betraying a flicker of grief for the brother she had lost, despite their enmity. Edward Hale lit yet another cigarette, his hands steadier now that suspicion had lifted from him. Dr. Simon Balfour, ever the observer, watched Maggie's departure with a clinician's detachment, though his fingers tightened on his pen. The air was heavy with the weight of truth, and the fog outside pressed against the theater's windows like a silent mourner. Poirot turned to the group, his voice warm yet precise, carrying the soothing cadence of a storyteller concluding a tale. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, "the curtain falls on this tragedy, but not without order and method. The murder of Victor Marlowe was a crime of passion, yes, but also of calculation. Mademoiselle Poole, in her devotion, wove a tapestry of deceit, but the threads of truth could not be hidden from Hercule Poirot." Japp, wiping his brow, approached Poirot. "You've done it again, old man. Wrapped it up neat as a parcel. Maggie's confessed, full details too. She's talking about how Marlowe dismissed her work, called her ideas unworthy of his name. Seems that was the spark that lit the fuse. He shook his head, glancing at the stage. Still a locked room? That window trick in the passage. Clever bit of stagecraft, I'll give her that. Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. Oui, Inspector. Mademoiselle Poole was a shadow, unnoticed yet indispensable. Her talent, uncredited, became her torment. The hidden passage, the duplicate key, the planted crimson thread, these were her props, used to craft an illusion of impossibility. But the grease paint smudge, the forged prop list, these were her mistakes, the flaws in her performance. Hastings leaned forward, his curiosity undimmed. I say, Poirot, how did you know it was the passage and not the window? That scratch had me fooled. Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. The window, mon ami, was a distraction, a red herring worthy of Marlowe's own scripts. The scratch was too deliberate, the rust too intact. But the passage, with its scuff mark and sprinkled ash, told a different story. Mademoiselle Poole, knowing the theater's secrets, used it to enter and exit, locking the door behind her. The duplicate key, hidden in the passage, was her masterstroke. Until I found the ash, betraying her attempt to mask her tracks. The suspects, though cleared, remained shaken. Lillian, her voice soft, spoke first. I thought it might have been me next after that fall from the catwalk. Maggie pushed me, didn't she, to keep me quiet? Her eyes searched Poirot's, seeking reassurance. Précisément, Poirot replied. Your role in the Midnight Veil, a woman betrayed, mirrored Mademoiselle Poole's own pain. She feared you suspected her, perhaps from a glance or a word. The attack was impulsive, a desperate bid to divert suspicion, but it only tightened the noose. Thorne, his voice hoarse, interjected, What happens to the play now? Without Marlowe, it's doomed. My career's finished. His despair was palpable, but Poirot's gaze was unsympathetic. Monsieur Thorne, he said, the stage endures, as does ambition. The Midnight Veil will premiere, perhaps with new hands to guide it. Your task is to rise, not to lament. Clara Marlowe stepped forward, her black dress a stark contrast to the crimson thread that had nearly implicated her. Victor was a fool, she said, her voice steady but laced with sorrow. He took everything, our home, our legacy, but I didn't want him dead. Maggie, I never suspected her. She seemed so loyal. Her words hung heavy, a reminder of the family ties severed by greed and pride. Poirot inclined his head. Madame, your brother's choices created enemies, but your presence tonight speaks of a wish to heal, however faint. The crimson thread was a cruel trick planted to cast suspicion on you, but the truth has freed you. Hale, exhaling smoke, muttered, I'm glad it's over. Marlowe's script was dangerous, but I didn't kill him to silence it. My investments are safe. For now. His relief was tinged with guilt, and Poirot noted the flicker of unease in his eyes, perhaps at the secrets still buried in his ledgers. Balfour, the last to speak, offered a measured nod. Victor's paranoia was his undoing, but I failed to see how deeply Maggie's resentment ran. As his physician, I should have noticed. His calm was unbroken, but Poirot sensed a regret beneath the surface, a man who saw too much yet acted too late. As the suspects dispersed, preparing to face the press and public beyond the theater's doors, Poirot lingered on stage, his gaze fixed on the draped portrait from the Midnight Veil. He lifted the cloth once more, revealing the blank canvas, a symbol of the secrets Marlowe had sought to expose. The play, he murmured, was his final act in Mademoiselle Poole's tragedy. Both sought to unveil truths, but at what cost? The premiere of The Midnight Veil went ahead the following night, a bittersweet triumph. The auditorium was packed, the audience unaware of the drama that had unfolded behind the scenes. Lillian took the stage with newfound gravitas, her performance a tribute to Marlowe's vision. Thorne, though shaken, directed with a steady hand, his career salvaged by the play's success. Clara attended, a silent figure in the back, her presence a quiet reconciliation with her brother's memory. Hale's investors applauded, their faith in him restored, while Balfour watched from the wings, his thoughts inscrutable. Poirot and Hastings left the theater as the fog thickened, the gaslights casting halos in the mist. "A fine resolution, Poirot," Hastings said, pulling his coat tighter. "Maggie's behind bars, the play's a hit, and the theater's safe. Yet it feels unfinished somehow." Poirot's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "Mon ami, the human heart is never finished. Love, betrayal, ambition, these are the eternal players on life's stage." Mademoiselle Poole sought justice in her own way, but her method was chaos. Hercule Poirot restores order, but the heart, it remains a mystery. They walked into the London night, the fog swallowing their footsteps. The Ashbourne Theatre loomed behind them, its secrets laid bare, but its allure undimmed. "Order and method," Poirot said softly. "They always prevail. Yet the shadows linger, do they not?" Chapter 8. Echoes of the Veil. The Ashbourne Theatre, though cleansed by the revelation of Margaret Maggie Poole's guilt, seemed to hold its breath in the aftermath of Victor Marlowe's murder. The premiere of The Midnight Veil had preceded the previous night, its success a bittersweet tribute to the fallen playwright. Yet as the gaslights flickered and the fog pressed against the theater's windows, Hercule Poirot sensed that the drama was not yet fully resolved. The stage, with its draped portrait and heavy velvet curtains, seemed to guard one final act, a truth hidden in the echoes of Marlowe's work. Poirot stood in the auditorium, his polished cane tapping softly on the polished floor, his green eyes scanning the crimson seats where the audience had applauded only hours before. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, lingered nearby, his face a mix of satisfaction and unease. "I thought we'd tied this one up, Poirot," he said, adjusting his hat. "Maggie's confessed, the play's a hit, and the suspects are free. Yet you're still prowling about like there's another clue to find." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile betraying his restless mind. "Mon ami, the case is solved, oui, but the heart of a mystery is never so simple. The murder of Victor Marlowe was a performance, but the play, The Midnight Veil, it holds secrets that echo beyond the killer's confession. Hercule Poirot does not rest until all shadows are illuminated." Inspector Japp, joining them from the wings, looked weary but curious. "You're not suggesting we missed something, are you, Poirot? Maggie's in custody, her motive clear as day, resentment over uncredited work. She laid it all out, the passage, the duplicate key, the planted thread, even admitted to pushing Lillian. What's left to dig up?" Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, pacing toward the stage. "The facts, Inspector, are in order, but the why, it is incomplete. Mademoiselle Poole's rage was real, but her confession, it lacks depth. Why did Marlowe's dismissal of her work drive her to murder now? And the play itself, its themes of betrayal and hidden truths, suggests a larger story. We must look to the script, to the echoes of the veil." The auditorium was quiet, the cast and crew dispersed, but the suspects had agreed to meet Poirot one final time, drawn by his insistence that loose ends remained. Lillian Cresswell, Reginald Thorne, Clara Marlowe, Edward Hale, and Dr. Simon Balfour gathered in the green room, their faces a mix of relief and apprehension. The air was thick with the scent of old velvet and lingering cigarette smoke, a reminder of the tension that had gripped them for days. Poirot began, his voice warm yet commanding. Mesdames et messieurs, the murder of Victor Marlowe has been solved, yet the Ashbourne Theatre holds one final secret. The Midnight Veil was not merely a play, it was a mirror, reflecting truths that Marlowe dared not speak aloud. I have read the script, and its words reveal more than Mademoiselle Poole's confession. He held up a copy of The Midnight Veil, its pages marked with his precise annotations. The play tells of a woman betrayed, her voice stolen by a man of power. This, we know, was Mademoiselle Poole's story, but there is more. A coded line buried in Act 3, Scene 2 reads, "The shadow weaves the veil, but the light betrays." This, I believe, was Marlowe's confession, a warning of his own betrayal. Lillian, her bruise fading, leaned forward. A confession? You mean Victor knew someone was after him? Précisément, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. Marlowe was a man of secrets, and his play was his cipher. I returned to his office this morning and found a hidden compartment in his desk, overlooked in our initial search. He produced a small leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Marlowe's looping script. This journal details his fears, not of Mademoiselle Poole alone, but of a conspiracy within the theater. He suspected his work was being exploited, his secrets sold. Hastings gasped. A conspiracy? But Maggie acted alone, didn't she? Poirot's gaze turned to the suspects. Mademoiselle Poole was the hand that fired the gun, but her rage was fueled by another's influence. Let us reconsider the motives. He turned to Edward Hale, whose cigarette trembled in his hand. Monsieur Hale, your investments in the Midnight Veil were substantial. Yet Marlowe's script hinted at your dealings. Blackmail, perhaps, disguised as fiction. The journal mentions a financier who pressured Marlowe to alter the play, to soften its truths. You met him that night, Non. Not to discuss funding, but to threaten him. Hale's face paled. I told you I left him alive. Yes, I pressed him to change a few lines. Business is business, but I didn't kill him. Poirot nodded, moving to Dr. Simon Balfour. Doctor, you knew Marlowe's mind. His journal names a confidant who probed too deeply, seeking secrets to sell. Your argument with him, overheard by Mademoiselle Poole, was not about his health, but about your knowledge of his script's sources, secrets you offered to others for profit. Balfour's calm cracked, his eyes narrowing. That's preposterous. I was his physician, nothing more. Non, Poirot countered. Your presence near the balcony staircase, your access to Marlowe's fears, you fed Mademoiselle Poole's resentment, subtly urging her to act. You did not pull the trigger, but you lit the spark. The room tensed as Poirot turned to Maggie Poole, now absent but central to his narrative. Mademoiselle Poole's confession was true but incomplete. She killed Marlowe in a moment of rage, but her anger was stoked by whispers, by Monsieur Hale's threats, by Dr. Balfour's manipulations. She believed Marlowe's dismissal was universal, not knowing others used her pain for their gain. Clara Marlowe, her voice sharp, interrupted. Are you saying Maggie was a pawn? That these men drove her to it? Poirot inclined his head. In part, madame. Your brother's death was a tragedy of many hands. Mademoiselle Poole's act was her own, but the stage was set by others' greed and betrayal. The crimson thread planted to implicate you was her idea. But the idea to act may have come from whispered encouragements. Thorne, his voice hoarse, spoke up. And me? Lillian? Are we clear? Or did we somehow push her too? Poirot's gaze softened. Monsieur Thorne, your desperation was real, but you were no conspirator. Mademoiselle Cresswell, your ambition made you a target, not a culprit. The attack on you was Mademoiselle Poole's attempt to deflect suspicion, but it was her final mistake. Japp, scratching his head, stepped forward. So what now, Poirot? Maggie's arrested, but are you saying Hale and Balfour are accomplices? Poirot shook his head. Not in the legal sense, Inspector. Their guilt is moral, not criminal. They sowed the seeds of discontent, but Mademoiselle Poole reaped the harvest. The law will judge her alone, but the truth, it judges all. The suspects sat in silence, their secrets laid bare. Hale crushed his cigarette, his bravado gone. Balfour's pen stilled, his composure a fragile shell. Clara's eyes glistened, her resentment tempered by understanding. Lillian and Thorne exchanged glances, their futures uncertain but free. Poirot turned to the stage where the draped portrait stood. The midnight veil was Marlowe's legacy, a mirror of his world, flawed and beautiful. Its premiere was his triumph, but also his warning. The shadows weave the veil, but the light betrays. Hercule Poirot has brought that light. As the group dispersed, the theater seemed to sigh, its grandeur undimmed by tragedy. Poirot and Hastings walked into the fog, the gaslights casting halos around them. "A messy business, Poirot," Hastings said. "Maggie's the killer, but Hale and Balfour, they're not innocent, are they?" "Non, mon ami," Poirot replied, his voice soft. "Innocence is rare in the theater of life, but justice, it takes many forms. Mademoiselle Poole will face the law while others face their consciences. The stage is clear, but the echoes remain." The fog swallowed their figures, and the Ashbourne Theatre stood silent, its secrets unveiled, but its mysteries eternal. Chapter 9. Shadows of Motive. The Ashbourne Theatre, with its gilded cornices and crimson velvet, stood as a monument to both triumph and tragedy. The premiere of The Midnight Veil had captivated London's awe as an elite, but the murder of Victor Marlowe cast a long shadow over its success. Hercule Poirot, his impeccable suit and symmetrical mustache a stark contrast to the chaos of the past days, lingered in the theater's green room, where the scent of old perfume and cigarette smoke clung to the air. The resolution of Maggie Poole's guilt had brought justice, but Poirot's gray cells remained restless, sensing that the motives driving the crime were more intricate than a single act of betrayal. Captain Hastings sat nearby, flipping through his notebook, while Inspector Japp, his trench coat rumpled, coordinated with his constables to finalize reports. "Mon ami," Poirot said to Hastings, his voice warm yet deliberate. "The curtain has fallen on Mademoiselle Poole's crime, but the play is not yet complete. The motives, love, greed, resentment, they intertwine like the threads of a tapestry. We must examine them closely, for the truth is not only in the act, but in the hearts that shaped it." Hastings frowned, closing his notebook. "I thought we had it all sorted, Poirot. Maggie killed Marlowe because he stole her work. Hale and Balfour stirred her up, but she pulled the trigger. What's left to uncover?" Japp, overhearing, grunted. "He's right, Poirot. We've got a confession, evidence, the lot. The passage, the key, the grease paint, it's all tied up. You're not saying there's another killer, are you?" Poirot's eyes twinkled, his cane tapping softly. "Non, Inspector. The killer is Mademoiselle Poole, but the why? It is deeper than resentment alone. The Ashbourne Theatre is a stage of human passions, and each player had a role in this drama. Let us gather them once more to understand the shadows of motive." The suspects, Lillian Cresswell, Reginald Thorne, Clara Marlowe, Edward Hale, and Dr. Simon Balfour, reconvened in the green room at Poirot's request, their faces a mix of weariness and curiosity. The premiere's success had lifted some of their burdens, but the weight of Marlowe's death lingered. Lillian, her bruise now faint, sat with a quiet dignity, her emerald gown replaced by a simple dress. Thorne, his bluster subdued, fidgeted with his cravat. Clara stood by a window, her black silk dress absorbing the dim light. Hale's cigarette smoke curled upward, his eyes wary. Balfour, ever composed, leaned back in a wingback chair, his pen poised as if ready to dissect the conversation. Poirot began, his voice a soothing cadence, like a storyteller unraveling the final threads. Mesdames et messieurs, the murder of Victor Marlowe was a tragedy of many acts. Mademoiselle Poole's confession has revealed her hand, but the motives that drove her were not hers alone. Each of you, in your way, cast a shadow that shaped this crime. Let us explore these shadows to see the full picture. He turned first to Lillian Cresswell, whose eyes widened at his scrutiny. Mademoiselle, your ambition was a beacon, but also a vulnerability. Marlowe's threat to recast your role in the Midnight Veil was a wound to your pride. Your presence in the wings, the grease paint smudge, these suggested guilt, but also made you a target. Mademoiselle Poole's attack on you was no accident. She feared you saw her near the office, perhaps during her preparations. Your passion for the stage, it fueled her paranoia. Lillian's voice trembled, but she held her head high. I never suspected Maggie. I thought Victor's death was my fault, that I'd driven him to despair, but I only wanted his approval. Her sincerity touched the room, and Poirot nodded, his gaze softening. Next, he addressed Reginald Thorne, whose florid face flushed deeper. Monsieur Thorne, your career hung by a thread tethered to Marlowe's genius. His interference, his rewrites, his demands, threatened your control. The screwdriver on the catwalk suggested your hand, yet your alibi held. Your desperation, however, was a spark. Mademoiselle Poole, overhearing your complaints about Marlowe's tyranny, found validation for her own resentment. You did not kill, but your words lit a fuse. Thorne's shoulders sagged. I griped, yes, but who wouldn't? Marlowe was impossible. I never thought Maggie would take it that far. His voice cracked, revealing a man humbled by unintended consequences. Clara Marlowe met Poirot's gaze with her usual icy reserve, but her hands betrayed a slight tremor. Madame, Poirot said, your estrangement from your brother was a wound unhealed. The loss of your family estate fueled a grudge that Mademoiselle Poole exploited. The crimson thread planted to implicate you was her cruel mimicry of your pain. Your walk in the fog, unverified, made you vulnerable, but also a symbol of Marlowe's past sins. Your presence here stirred Maggie's memories of Victor's betrayals. Clara's eyes glistened, her voice low. Victor was a thief, but he was my brother. I came to reconcile, not to see him die. Maggie used my pain against me. Her admission was a rare crack in her armor, and Poirot inclined his head in acknowledgement. Edward Hale, his cigarette nearly spent, shifted uncomfortably as Poirot turned to him. Monsieur Hale, your fortune backed the Midnight Veil, but Marlowe's script threatened to expose your dealings. Blackmail, perhaps, veiled as fiction. Your meeting with him, admitted belatedly, was no mere discussion. You pressured him to alter the play, and Mademoiselle Poole, aware of your influence, saw Marlowe's capitulation as another betrayal. Your greed fed her rage. Hale crushed his cigarette, his voice sharp. I told him to tone it down, yes, but I didn't want him dead. My money was on the line. His play was my profit. Maggie twisted it all. His defensiveness rang hollow, and Poirot's gaze pierced through it. Finally, Dr. Simon Balfour met Poirot's scrutiny with his usual calm, though his fingers tightened on his pen. Doctor, Poirot said, you knew Marlowe's mind, his paranoia, his fears. His journal named a confidant who probed for secrets, perhaps to sell them. Your argument with him, overheard by Mademoiselle Poole, was not about health, but about the play's truths. You urged Maggie to confront Marlowe, knowing her resentment. You did not pull the trigger, but you sharpened the blade. Balfour's composure wavered, his voice measured but strained. Victor was unraveling. I advised him to trust Maggie, to share credit. If she misunderstood, that's not my crime. His denial was smooth, but Poirot sensed the guilt beneath. Poirot paced, his cane tapping a steady rhythm. Each of you in your way shaped Mademoiselle Poole's path. Her rage was her own, but your actions, your words, your pressures, wove the veil that blinded her to reason. The play, The Midnight Veil, was Marlowe's mirror, reflecting your betrayals. Its coded line, "The shadow weaves the veil, but the light betrays," was his plea for truth, and Mademoiselle Poole's undoing. Hastings whispered, "So they're all guilty in a way, not just Maggie." Poirot nodded, his voice soft. "Oui, mon ami. Guilt is not only in the act, but in the ripples that lead to it. Mademoiselle Poole fired the gun, but the theater, its ambitions, its secrets, unset the stage." Japp, rubbing his temples, sighed. "This is too philosophical for me, Poirot. Maggie's in the dock, and that's what counts. But I'll look into Hale's dealings and Balfour's notes. Might be something there for the fraud squad." The suspects dispersed, their faces heavy with introspection. Lillian vowed to honor Marlowe's vision in future performances. Thorne began planning a revival, his ambition reignited. Clara, softened by truth, planned to visit her brother's grave. Hale and Balfour left in silence, their secrets exposed but their fates uncertain. Poirot and Hastings stepped into the fog, the theater's silhouette fading behind them. "A dark business, Poirot," Hastings said. "Maggie's the killer, but the others, they're not blameless." "Non," Poirot replied, his eyes distant. "The human heart is a stage of shadows, Hastings. We seek justice, but the motives, they linger, like echoes of a play." Chapter 10. The Final Curtain. The Ashbourne Theatre stood as a silent sentinel in the heart of London's West End, its gilded facade softened by the ever-present fog of 1927. The premiere of The Midnight Veil had come and gone, a triumph marred by the tragedy of Victor Marlowe's murder. The revelation of Margaret Maggie Poole's guilt, coupled with the subtle roles played by others in stoking her rage, had left the theatre's players forever changed. Hercule Poirot, his immaculate suit and symmetrical mustache untouched by the chaos of the past days, lingered in the auditorium, his green eyes reflecting the faint glow of the gas lights. The stage, with its draped portrait and heavy velvet curtains, seemed to whisper of secrets now laid bare, yet Poirot's mind remained active, seeking the final notes of this complex symphony. Captain Hastings stood beside him, his coat buttoned against the chill seeping through the theater's walls. "Well, Poirot," he said, his voice tinged with relief. "It's over, isn't it? Maggie's in custody, the play's a success, and the truth's out. Yet you're still here, staring at the stage like there's another act to come." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Mon ami, the crime is solved, oui, but a mystery is more than its solution. The Ashbourne Theatre has revealed its killer, but its story, the passions, the betrayals, lingers like the echo of applause. Hercule Poirot does not leave until the final curtain falls." Inspector Japp, his trench coat rumpled from days of relentless work, joined them, his notebook tucked away. "You've got a knack for making things complicated, Poirot," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Maggie's confessed, the evidence is solid, and we've got statements tying up the loose ends. Hale's being watched for his dodgy dealings, and Balfour's notes are under review. What's left? You're not saying there's another twist, are you?" Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his cane tapping softly. "None, Inspector. The killer is Mademoiselle Poole, and her confession is complete. But the theater, it is a mirror of the human heart. We must reflect on the lessons it teaches, for they are as vital as the justice we serve." The suspects, Lillian Cresswell, Reginald Thorne, Clara Marlowe, Edward Hale, and Dr. Simon Balfour, had agreed to one final meeting at Poirot's request, drawn by his insistence that the case deserved a proper epilogue. They gathered in the auditorium, seated in the crimson stalls, their faces a mix of exhaustion and introspection. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and faded dreams, the stage looming before them like a silent judge. Poirot ascended the stage, his small figure commanding the vast space. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice warm and deliberate, like a storyteller bidding farewell. "The murder of Victor Marlowe was a tragedy of many acts, each of you a player in its unfolding. Mademoiselle Poole's hand fired the gun, but your motives, your ambitions, your resentments, wove the veil that cloaked her crime. Tonight we reflect not only on justice, but on the shadows that remain." He turned first to Lillian Cresswell, who sat with a newfound gravitas, her theatrical flair tempered by the ordeal. "Mademoiselle, your ambition was a fire that burned brightly, but it blinded you to Mademoiselle Poole's pain. Your role in the Midnight Veil was Marlowe's gift, but also his weapon used to stoke her jealousy. Your attack on the catwalk was her desperate act, but it has taught you none. To see beyond the spotlight." Lillian nodded, her voice soft. "I was so caught up in my own dreams I didn't see Maggie's struggle. Victor used me to push her, and I played along. I'll perform for him now to honor his work." Her sincerity was a stark contrast to her earlier dramatics, and Poirot's gaze softened in approval. Next, he addressed Reginald Thorne, whose florid face was pale, his bluster replaced by quiet reflection. "Monsieur Thorne, your desperation to reclaim your career made you a voice of discontent. Your complaints about Marlowe's interference echoed in Mademoiselle Poole's ears, fueling her rage. You did not intend this, but the stage teaches us. Words have power." Thorne rubbed his neck, his voice low. "I was a fool railing against Victor. I thought I was protecting my work, but I pushed Maggie over the edge. The play's a hit now, but it feels hollow. I'll direct with more care, Poirot." His admission was a rare humility, and Poirot noted the shift with a nod. Clara Marlowe stood by the aisle, her black dress a symbol of mourning now softened by understanding. "Madame," Poirot said, "your brother's betrayal of your family was a wound that shaped this tragedy. The crimson thread planted to frame you was Mademoiselle Poole's cruel mimicry of your pain. Yet your presence here, your attempt to reconcile, speaks of a heart-seeking peace." Clara's eyes glistened, her voice steady but emotional. "Victor and I were broken long before this. I came to mend things, but Maggie used my anger against him. I'll visit his grave, Poirot, to say goodbye, not to curse him." Her resolve was a quiet triumph, and Poirot inclined his head in respect. Edward Hale, his cigarette smoke curling upward, met Poirot's gaze with wary defiance. "Monsieur Hale," Poirot said, "on your greed cast a long shadow. Your pressure on Marlowe to alter the Midnight Veil fed Mademoiselle Poole's belief that he betrayed all who trusted him. Your secrets remain, but the stage has exposed your role in this drama." Hale exhaled sharply, his voice gruff. "I played hard, but I didn't kill him. The play's success saves my investments, but I'll watch my step now. Marlowe's pen was sharper than I thought." His admission was grudging, but Poirot sensed a flicker of caution in his eyes. Finally, Dr. Simon Balfour, his calm demeanor strained, faced Poirot's scrutiny. "Doctor, your knowledge of Marlowe's mind was a double-edged sword. You saw his paranoia, his fears, and you fed them to Mademoiselle Poole, urging her to confront him. Your motives, perhaps profit, perhaps curiosity, shaped her path to murder." Balfour's pen stilled, his voice tight. "I sought to help Victor, to make him see Maggie's worth. If I misjudged, it was not with intent to kill." His defense was measured, but Poirot's gaze pierced through, noting the guilt beneath the surface. Poirot stepped to the center of the stage, his cane tapping a final note. "The Midnight Veil was Marlowe's mirror, reflecting your truths and lies. Its coated line where the shadow weaves the veil but the light betrays was his plea for honesty and Mademoiselle Poole's downfall. Each of you played a part, not in the crime but in the passions that drove it. Justice has claimed Mademoiselle Poole, but the heart, it must find its own redemption. Jap, listening from the wings, shook his head. You've a way of making it all sound like poetry, Poirot. Maggie's facing trial, and that's the end of it for me. But I'll keep an eye on Hale and Balfour. Those shadows you talk about might have more to tell. Hastings, standing, clapped Poirot on the shoulder. You've done it again, old chap. Solved the impossible and made us all think a bit harder about ourselves. What's next? Poirot smiled, his eyes distant. The next mystery, mon ami, is always waiting. But for now, we leave the Ashbourne Theatre to its dreams and shadows. The human heart is the greatest stage, and its dramas never end. As the suspects left, their footsteps echoing in the empty auditorium, Poirot lingered, his gaze fixed on the draped portrait. He lifted the cloth one last time, the blank canvas a silent testament to Marlowe's vision. The veil is lifted, he murmured, but the shadows remain. Poirot and Hastings stepped into the fog, the gaslights casting halos in the mist. The Ashbourne Theatre faded behind them, its secrets unveiled but its allure eternal. Order and method, Poirot said softly. They bring justice, but the heart, it writes its own script.